it felt like a big chapter in this nation's story.
It was an opportunity to make some steps forward together, I suppose, but it looks like we took a couple steps back.
I think there was a lot of hurt leading up to the day of the referendum as well as the days afterwards.
That's how some Indigenous Australians are feeling a year on from the failed Voice referendum. They were speaking there to the ABC documentary, Australia, What Do You Reckon? 1 year on from the Voice referendum. Monday marks the anniversary of the referendum, and there is still debate about why Australians voted no, and an even bigger debate about the path forward from here. I'm keen to hear from one of those who is heavily involved in the Voice campaign from its very origins, about what this anniversary means and where Indigenous Australians go now. I'm David Speers on Ngunnawal country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. Professor Megan Davis is a constitutional law expert at the University of New South Wales. She helped design the constitutional process that led to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. She then read the Uluru Statement to the nation as the co-chair of the Uluru Dialogue, and then served on the government's referendum working group and constitutional expert group that came up with the referendum question. Megan Davis, welcome. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
So, look, first question, how do you feel about the anniversary?
I feel like a lot of mob. I mean, we're all talking about it and preparing for it. Pretty sad, I think. And it doesn't bring up many happy memories. And I think most of us will kind of not do anything on the day. But I think it's been a long year of grieving, and I think there's a lot of people, as we're reading in the papers all last week and this weekend, and the anniversary of leaders just feeling still very disappointed and feeling very upset about the result.
Yeah, and you say a long year of grieving. Just tell me a bit about what that 12 months has been like.
Yeah, it's been a long 12 months. I think, Pat Anderson and I lead a large team of people that participated in this process over 12 years, and especially a very large group of young Uluru leaders, or Uluru Dialogue youth leaders, they're called. And they've been particularly devastated. I mean, I think this is probably the first time they've seen a major political rejection, but on quite an acute level. And they've found it hard to process it. But I also have colleagues like Pat Anderson, leaders who participated in fighting for structural reform and rights for Pat, 65 years. She's 80 this year, and, people like Pat and other leaders are really devastated. It's been tough.
So a long 12-year process. What is the status now of the Uluru Statement?
So, I mean, one of the things, David, that we found really surprising, or perhaps not so surprising, in the kind of, multitudes of research that's been done since the referendum, and including the most recent piece of work by Essential, is that most Australians don't know what the Uluru Statement from the Heart is. They don't know what the dialogues were, and they don't know that the Voice came from mob. They think it came from politicians. So, I mean, that some of that research has been really, really surprising. But then as we've untangled things, analysed virtually every media article, interview, radio interview, tracking it from 2020 right through to October 14, is that we found that perhaps Australians didn't get a very clear idea of what the Voice was, and that we were blindsided by quite a lot of misinformation, including in the official pamphlet. And I was on the committees that asked the government to pass an amendment to the legislation that allowed that pamphlet to be fact-checked, so that every single pamphlet going out to the Australian community wasn't full of political lies. But that didn't happen. And so I think, I think initially mob were devastated and spending a lot of time thinking, well, what did we do wrong? But as we've slowly clinically analysed it and had a lot of people look at it for us as well, it seems like, we would say we didn't really have a very fair go in that campaign. And we're happy to see that there's a lot of regulation now happening in the space of misinformation in elections, because I think it's very important to the integrity of a democratic system. But when you ask about the status of the Uluru Statement from the heart, it's very difficult to answer that question based on last year's referendum.
Yeah, and I want to come to where it goes from here, but just to, don't dwell too much on what went wrong, but it sounds like you don't think there was anything wrong with the idea. The criticism was that it would create different sets of rights for different Australians. You still stand by the idea itself?
Yeah, of course. I mean, many liberal democracies across the world are grappling with this key problem of the way in which two major political parties dominate that representative function of liberal democracy, which we elect them through the ballot box. But we're not the first group of citizens to say, hey, let's adjust our mechanisms of democracy to allow us to have a more enhanced say in democratic decision-making about our lives. When we did the Uluru Dialogues, Mob didn't select treaty as their option. They chose to participate in Australian democracy. That is what Uluru is about. It is about belonging, and it's about adjusting our structures of governance as a nation to accommodate the people that have been here for 60,000 years, who are just asking to have a non-binding say on matters that impact upon their lives. And I don't think the messaging about the Voice and what the Voice stood for really became prominent at all during the campaign. But just one more point, if I can make it, David, and that is, I've just come back from New York, helping to open a really extraordinary all-new exhibition in New York at the Asia Modern Society. And I was privileged to give the Distinguished Wanambi lecture. And I spoke about the pioneering nature of the Yolngu people, particularly in the community of Yirrkala. And when you look at the Bark petitions were a call for a voice in Australian democracy decades and decades and decades ago. The reality is, even in colonial governments, our people in the early 1800s were asking for a voice. So the voice isn't the problem. And also, the amendment wasn't legally risky. Our problem was that we weren't able to prosecute our arguments in a way that arguments that were of bad faith and misinformation were elevated to the same level as ours. So misinformation did play a really acute role in that campaign.
When it became clear that there wasn't going to be bipartisanship, and you saw the numbers drop off in support of the yes case, is it true that you felt it should have been pulled? Did you suggest to the Prime Minister at any point, maybe we shouldn't go ahead with this?
I think that so on bipartisanship, I wasn't concerned at that particular point. And I think Murray Goot, the political scientist, has put out a really good paper about how the Australian kind of political class's analysis of referendums is a bit skewed. And it's not just to do with bipartisanship that most of the referendums have lost. And I think that's an important point to make. I think most people have settled on bipartisanship. I think that helps people find a way through what happened. But certainly we were concerned that if it was that the Prime Minister and others had really definitive information that it was going to lose, we were concerned with why that would proceed, given it was very apparent we didn't have enough time to prosecute the case and educate the Australian people on what a voice was. But more importantly, not so much about the voice, but this decade-long advocacy, bipartisan, multi-partisan process for constitutional recognition. And so,
And did you say that to him? Did you ever say to the PM, this is looking risky, this is going to hurt more than it's going to help, we should drop it?
I never had that kind of relationship with the Prime Minister. But okay. I know that there are leaders deeply concerned about continuing on if it was that they had such definitive information that it was going to fail.
But was that your view, to be clear, before the referendum, that it shouldn't proceed?
I think it's hard to say now, but I certainly would have been up for that discussion. Referendums, they can lapse. And I think, there could have been better coordinated conversations about that.
Where we're at now, I know it's difficult to describe the status right now of the Uluru Statement, but clearly you still firmly believe in what it calls for. That the voice was put up for the referendum, but what about Macara? We had the comments from the Prime Minister back at the Ghana Festival in August about this. Is it clear to you what the government's position now is on Macara and truth-telling and the process on that front?
No, I mean, I know as much as everybody else who watches telly and sees comments from the newspaper, etc. I mean, I think that's a big decision for them because, of course, the Macara Commission is not Voice, and the Macara Commission that did go through their policy conference, and it wasn't part of their election platform. So, that would be a broken election promise, presumably. They've said they don't think they can prosecute that with the current opposition and that they'll leave it to the next term. Voice wasn't a part of their election policy and they still went forth with the referendum. On this occasion, it was costed and it was a major part of their platform. So,
and it was funded in the budget, wasn't it? There was money there for the commission.
Yeah, money was set aside for the commission. So that was a key part of their Indigenous policy. So, I mean, it looks post-Gama, I think this week the Minister has said it's off the table. And I think that will be a subject of the conversation going into the election.
So where do we go from here? I mean, clearly a lot of doubt around the fate of a Macara Commission then, given what you've just said there. Where do you think we need to go as a nation and where the government needs to steer things? Or should it be government? Should it be, Indigenous leaders taking charge here? What needs to happen now?
I think there's two answers to that. I think the Uluru Statement was issued to the Australian people for a very particular reason, and that was a lot of our old people, a lot of our people thought if you leave it up to politicians, they will get us to no town because of the nature of adversarial politics in Australia. The kind of sentiment behind Uluru was always you're only going to get change in the field of Aboriginal affairs if you work through the people. And so we'd never done that before. That was a historic invitation. It's why it's so important. It's why it took so long to draft and why it remains a really important historic document in the vein of the Yirrkala Bark petitions. That sentiment, I think, probably got lost. I mean, if you're thinking about campaign, I'm not a campaigner, but reflecting on campaigns, it was meant to be a conversation between Australians and Australians, and I think it took a very conventional election approach. And so the second point to make there is, it was issued for Australians to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people. That requires a lot of conversations between our mob and Aussies. And we all live in 151 electorates across this continent. And I think what it's done is just reconfirm for everybody involved that instinct about the only way to get change in this space is to work with Aussies, so that by the time you get to the ballot box, by the time you get to that electorate office, people are fully informed. And I'm not sure when we went to vote last year that all Australians were fully informed about the voice in the way they should have been. And so I wouldn't say the greatest thing because I don't want to talk in that way, but David, in the darkest, and there were really dark weeks after that referendum, people kept their kids home from school. It was really hard to go out in public. You just felt like everybody disliked you and voted no. I think most mob around the country have the same sentiment. It was a really awful time.
It was felt personally, was it?
I think everybody took it personally. I mean, I remember the night after just going to dinner. It was just excruciating until I remembered I was in the seat of Brisbane and everybody, they voted yes. And sometimes when you go to a place like Canberra and really big yes electorates, you feel a little bit better. But I think the 6.2 million Australians, that's what got all of us out of bed. That's
does there need to be from here? Does there need to be a fresh process? I'm thinking when you say it needs to come from Aussies, does there need to be a fresh process involving Indigenous and non-Indigenous Aussies to start from scratch on constitutional recognition, or is that a bit pie in the sky to think that we can go through all of this again?
No, I don't think it's pie in the sky at all. Like, our constitution was meant to change. That's incontrovertible. That's what our draft has said. It can be changed with the times. And I think even the CIS research, our research, all of the research shows Australia still supports constitutional recognition. I don't think it's something that's off the table, because I think that constitutions matter. Otherwise, I've spent 20 years studying them. We wouldn't think. It's been an aspiration of our mob for decades and decades, because constitutions matter. They provide the material conditions for a dignified human life. And they've done that. Our constitution's done that really well for Aussies, but it hasn't done that really well for our people, who were excluded from that countenance for a very, very long time, up until, for all intents and purposes, 67. But even then, that was just to allow the federal parliament to make laws. It didn't empower our people to make decisions and changes about their lives that will make a difference. And so I think
so would you support a fresh process of dialogues to start again?
So part of our conversation with Aussies right now, and that'll happen over the next year, and we're also doing a listening tour with our own mob using the dialogue process, is to have those conversations. And in those conversations, they're very structured around civics and our legal and political system, including our federal system. Why are we different to Canada? Why are we different to New Zealand? Why are we different to having really detailed conversations about the kind of country we live in and the kinds of ways in which we can influence and lever different parts of our political and legal systems to improve the role that our people play in Australian democracy. And so that will continue. And, David, no one said to the Republicans, hey, don't come back. And no one said to the politicians who are going again after two failures for a four-year election cycle. I think Dutton and Albanese very quickly after our referendum said they supported that. So you've got the political elites supporting the increase in the number of years they get to be politicians. No one says to 4-year terms, don't go again. So what I do think is different, though, David, as you said, is we have 6.2 million friends we didn't know we had. And they've been so generous and overwhelmingly supportive and encouraging. And the work that we're doing now is working with them on what the next phase looks like.
And just to be clear, would any symbolic recognition, as it's called, a simpler form of recognition, would that be okay, or does it need to be something that's more meaningful?
It's a good question. It is a really good question, because time and time again, our people have said they don't want symbolic or poetical recognition. And to be fair, if you look at some of the legal advice, which is why I was taken off the table in the expert panel period, I point people to Anne Toomey. It's actually a super dangerous thing just to put some lines of poetry at the beginning of the Constitution, just allow it to apply willy-nilly without any controls. Our people have always said no to symbolism. But in the expert panel and in the referendum council, Australians also said that the reform needed to be meaningful. It needs to, and when I say meaningful, it needs to have some concrete impact. Because most Aussies say don't go to a referendum if it's not going to have an impact. Now, they were unsure of that in that last referendum for all sorts of reasons. But they also don't know that, a lot don't know, that it was our people that chose the voice. It was our people that, as I said, didn't choose treaty. They chose an enhanced role in participating in Australian democracy. And so we have a lot of work to do, David, just having those yarns with Aussies that did vote no, did vote yes, and talking about what happened. And look, I don't know what the model looks like going forward, but I'm just saying, off the back of what is now the largest social justice movement in Australian history, that grassroots organic work is continuing.
And look, just a final one on this. You point out the long history to get to this point. How long do you think Indigenous Australians will have to wait still to see any sort of recognition in the Constitution?
There's a lot of people hurting. My deepest concern and of the impact of a no vote was, the downstream impact of that upon our young people. We already have a problem with our people's faith and trust in Australia's public institutions to protect them, to do what they're meant to do, and to recognise them. And this we have a big hurdle to persuade people to participate. There are very many young and angry mob. Part of the listening tour is to go out and very clinically walk through the polling, the research, to get a really good sense of, what happened here. I think a lot of people say it was just racism. I say it was many reasons, and I think we need to walk through those because I think it's important to look at the facts and then discuss them. So I think at the end of the day, though, David, and I do mean to chip the media here. It was really presented by mainstream media that our mob didn't support the voice, and that actually a very large majority were a no. And what was apparent immediately after the referendum, not just in remote areas and regional areas, and particularly the Northern Territory, as you know, only one of the, I think, 20 ballot boxes voted no. Everybody else was overwhelmingly yes. Even in urban areas where I think ANU did that survey overlaying Aboriginal population statistics over ballot boxes in the 151 electorates, our people voted yes. And in some of the research this year, Australians still don't know that actually our people supported it, and they were overwhelmingly yes. And I think that's a really key issue, because our people are fundamentally really pragmatic people. And if they can have a reform in the here and now that will make a difference to their communities' lives, to their people's lives, that allows their communities to have a voice in the decisions made about them, they will always say yes, because we're smart and pragmatic people. But as I said, the trust and faith and the feeling of belonging, I think about my niece who grew up in a really incredible, she's part of this young generation that grew up speaking language and singing Aboriginal songs. And she went to school on Friday, in grade 3, feeling a part of a nation, feeling like she belonged. And they went to school on Monday. Well, they didn't, because they were really terrified. I think a lot of families kept their kids home for a few days to hug them and hold them and tell them everything would be okay. She went back to school to a very different Australia. And I think that's something that our people are grappling with.
Look, before I let you go, and I don't know if you're keen to comment on this at all, but I'd just like to ask you about the former Labor Senator Fatima Payman. She announced her new political party during the week, Australia's Voice. She called it, and this, of course, right before the anniversary. And we've seen, a fair bit of concern expressed by those involved in the Yes campaign. What did you make of that?
I thought, well, as you can see, it's a hard week, and we've been wanting this not to happen all year, and it's a difficult time for our people. And I thought it was extraordinarily insensitive to announce that in the week leading up to a very difficult anniversary date for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and many Australians. I thought, the comment about the voice not being trademarked, I thought a lot of the discussion was a bit unseemly when a really significant proportion of the Australian population is really hurting. So I think I made the comment to one of the media outlets. I just found the timing really curious and a bit thoughtless, given the emotions that our people are going through right now as we face the first anniversary.
Well, we can see the difficulty this anniversary is causing, for you and many others. We do really appreciate you, reflecting on it all and discussing where things are at right now. Professor Megan Davis, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And if you have any thoughts on this conversation or any ideas for the pod, do drop us a line, insiders@abc.net.au. We'll see you on the couch Sunday morning. Bye for now.